What if the most powerful family in Hollywood had a secret so disturbing? It was literally fatal. That's not the trailer for a thriller. That's real life. A $13.5 million mansion in Brentwood, blood-slick floors, two lifeless bodies. Once icons of the screen, now victims of something unspeakable. Their son, Nick Reiner, once thought to be just another child of fame trying to find his place, now stands accused of cold-blooded, premeditated murder. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the twist? His own siblings, Jake, Tracy, and Romy, have just broken their silence. Not with tears, not with vague statements about prayers or privacy, but with a thunderclap. We hid the truth for years. What truth? That Nick wasn't just troubled, that his rage wasn't random, that they knew, and did nothing, because the cost of truth was the Reiner legacy. So why now? Why speak out after the blood has dried, the funerals are over, and the world has already made up its mind? Because what's been whispered behind closed Hollywood gates for decades is now a screaming headline, and the Reiner siblings can no longer outrun the monster they helped protect. Let's start where all family secrets begin, right behind the smiles. The Reiners were Hollywood gold. Rob Reiner wasn't just meathead from All in the Family. He was a director, a political voice, a man who told stories that shaped a generation. When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, Stand By Me, his touch turned scripts into classics. His name? Synonymous with integrity. Michelle Singer Reiner, his wife, was his elegant counterpart. A devoted activist, a quiet powerhouse behind the scenes. To the outside world, the Reiners represented not just success, but the right kind of success. Family, art, activism, legacy. They were the American dream, with better lighting. And their children? Jake Reiner followed the path of truth, journalism. Romy Reiner dabbled in comedy and directing, carving out a Gen Z niche in the arts. Tracy Reiner, Rob's daughter from his marriage to Penny Marshall, was a familiar face from A League of Their Own and Apollo 13. And then there was Nick, the youngest, the mystery. No red carpet, no public-facing projects, no presence, really at all. Just whispers, rumors. That one's had it rough. Drugs, maybe? Rehab. Didn't he have that meltdown in 2018? People speculated, but the Reiners never commented. They kept it quiet, controlled. The family was untouchable. That's what made them revered. That's what made them dangerous. Because if the image cracked, the empire could fall. But every perfect picture has a shadow, and Nick Reiner lived in it. While the world focused on Rob's next film or Romy's latest short, those close to the family, staffers, assistants, a neighbor or two, knew something wasn't right. There were screams late at night, glass breaking. One gardener allegedly quit after finding knife marks on the trees behind a guest house. And still, silence. No police reports. No public statements. Just PR polish and firm handshakes. Until December 14th. That was the day everything came crashing down. At precisely 6:41 a.m., a 911 call was placed from the Reiner estate. The voice on the line was calm, too calm. Romy Reiner, aged 27. She told dispatch there had been a violent incident. She requested police, medical, a crime scene team. When officers arrived, what they found was more horrific than any movie Rob Reiner ever directed. Michelle, 70, and Rob, 78, were found stabbed to death in the master bedroom. Multiple sharp force injuries. No signs of forced entry. No signs of a robbery. Just pure, surgical rage. And Nick? He was in the guest house, wearing pajamas, barefoot, and covered in blood. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He looked at the police and allegedly whispered, "I finally did it." Just 6 words. But what came next would fracture the very foundation of the Reiner family. The media exploded. Murder at the mansion. Director Rob Reiner dead in shocking double homicide. Son arrested after Hollywood power couple found dead. The story was everywhere. But one detail slipped under the radar at first. It wasn't just that Nick had been arrested. It was how quickly his siblings turned on him. Within 48 hours, a joint statement was released by Jake, Tracy, and Romy. "We are devastated. But more than grief, we are filled with guilt. Because this didn't come out of nowhere. We've lived in fear, denial, and silence for years. And that silence cost us everything. We hid the truth for too long. The internet gasped. What were they talking about? The Reiners weren't just saying they were sorry. They were confessing. And people wanted answers. Let's pause. Because this is where things get uncomfortable. This is where image breaks down into reality. Where legacy collides with guilt. The truth is, this wasn't Nick's first violent episode. And the family didn't just suspect something was wrong. They knew. There were emergency calls that never made the news. Therapists who signed NDAs. An entire crisis response team, hired privately, whose only job was to manage Nick's outbursts before they went public. Tracy Reiner had allegedly begged their father to have Nick institutionalized. Jake had reportedly stopped visiting the house altogether, citing hostility. And Romy? She left cryptic posts on social media. One now deleted caption read, "Some family members are better left in the shadows." But Rob wouldn't hear it. He loved his son. He believed in healing. He thought time, therapy, and love could fix it. So Nick stayed. In the guest house. On the same property. Until the silence finally screamed. Why does this matter now? Because this isn't just about the Reiner family. This is about the culture of denial in the face of mental illness. This is about what happens when power protects dysfunction. This is about the price of image. How many families, famous or not, have swept problems under the rug to avoid shame? How many times have we ignored red flags, hoping they go away? And how often does that silence end in tragedy? The Reiners, for all their privilege, are now a cautionary tale, not just of murder, but of what happens when love becomes enabling, when protection becomes complicity. And as the investigation deepens, more chilling details are surfacing. A diary, leaked therapy sessions, a deleted surveillance tape. The siblings, Jake, Tracy, and Romy, are finally talking. But their voices don't bring comfort. They bring confession. And what they're revealing will leave you stunned. Because as it turns out, Nick wasn't the only one with something to hide. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the perfect family wasn't perfect at all? What if the foundation of their fame, their so-called unity, was nothing more than a fragile illusion, masking decades of dysfunction? Because that's what the Reiners were hiding. And now, it's unraveling. Nick wasn't the only one with something to hide. Not even close. Let's rewind the clock, years before the blood-soaked headlines. Before the court dates. Before the confessions. Back when the Reiner name meant power, grace, and Hollywood royalty. Because behind that golden image, there were cracks. And they were getting wider. It started with the smiles, the award shows, the red carpets, the gala dinners where cameras flashed and everyone looked just right. Rob Reiner, the proud patriarch, always quick with a joke, always lifting his kids in his arms or giving long, heartfelt interviews about family values and generational storytelling. Michelle, the elegant matriarch, soft-spoken, always at Rob's side, always smiling. Her devotion to humanitarian causes painted her as someone too pure for Hollywood's chaos. And the kids? Picture perfect. Jake, the sharp one, bright-eyed, articulate, always the one to defend the family's right to privacy. Tracy, quiet and reflective. A product of both Reiner and Marshall legacies, carrying the weight of two empires in one poised expression. And Romy, fresh, funny, social media savvy. A balance of old-school Hollywood charm and Gen Z transparency. Then there was Nick. And that's where the picture begins to distort. The thing about families like the Reiners is this. They don't show the cracks. They sand them down. Repaint over them. Add another framed photo to the wall. Another glowing press release. Another staged interview. Because in Hollywood, appearance isn't just everything. It's survival. And Rob Reiner, for all his liberal ideals and progressive politics, knew that. He built his career on stories that challenged the status quo. That broke rules. But when it came to family, he kept the rules ironclad. You don't air dirty laundry. You don't acknowledge what makes people uncomfortable. And you never, ever let the media get a whiff of scandal. Especially not when the scandal lives in your guest house. From the beginning, Nick was different. Not just difficult. Not rebellious. Different. Teachers noted it. Babysitters quit because of it. One reportedly wrote in a resignation letter, "I'm not trained to handle a child with this level of emotional volatility. He scares me." Let that sink in. He scared people, even as a child. Still, the family denied it. Publicly and privately. He was sensitive, creative, going through a phase. There was always an excuse, a softened word, a softened smile. Even when Nick allegedly destroyed a classroom in 3rd grade and had to be removed by a crisis counselor, Rob called it a misunderstanding. Even when Michelle took him to a psychiatric evaluation at age 14 and left in tears, she told friends, "It's just stress." Because acknowledging something was wrong, that meant breaking the illusion, and the Reiners weren't ready for that. But here's the thing. You can't keep a volcano from erupting forever, and Nick was bubbling over. By 17, there were multiple incidents. Details are still murky, sealed by legal threats and non-disclosure agreements. But insiders whispered. A violent altercation with a cousin, an animal cruelty report, an overdose scare. Each time, the family swept it under. They moved him to a new therapist, pulled strings to keep his name out of the press, donated to local causes to make things right. Jake once allegedly told a friend, "Dad says we protect him at all costs, no matter what." But what happens when protecting becomes enabling? What happens when silence becomes complicity? You might be wondering, why didn't anyone step in? Why didn't Jake or Tracy or Romy say something publicly? Call the police? Alert the industry? Because they tried. At least, behind closed doors. Tracy was the first to pull away. After a deeply uncomfortable family retreat in Big Bear, where Nick allegedly threw a chair through a window during a group therapy session, Tracy stopped visiting. She stopped posting family photos. She stopped attending red carpet events with them. Quietly, she distanced herself. Sources say she told Rob, "You're choosing your son's image over everyone's safety." But Rob wouldn't budge. He believed Nick could get better. That love, patience, and privacy would heal the darkness. That if they just held on long enough, the storm would pass. He didn't understand. Nick wasn't in a storm. He was the storm. And Romy? She was torn. She loved Nick. She had memories of him teaching her to skateboard, building Lego cities in the living room, watching The Princess Bride for the 100th time while quoting every line. But she also feared him. There were nights she locked her bedroom door, even as an adult visiting home. There were texts to friends like, "He's spiraling again. I wish Dad would listen. I can't do this anymore." It's like living next to a landmine. One text, sent just weeks before the murder, simply said, "Something bad is going to happen." She knew. She always knew. But she didn't speak publicly. Not yet. Because to go public meant going against her own family. And that's not a line you cross easily. Jake, the oldest, the face of control, he tried to maintain the brand. He did interviews, wrote op-eds, appeared on panels about journalism and integrity. But behind the scenes, he was cracking. He reportedly refused to attend Nick's birthday party 3 years in a row. He canceled Thanksgiving last minute in 2022. Romy later hinted that it was because of a security incident. One of Jake's ex-girlfriends later posted anonymously. He was always checking in on his parents, always worried about them. He'd say stuff like, "I wish I could move them out of there, but they won't leave him." I never knew what he meant until now. Even with all that, none of them went public, because they believed Rob could hold the family together. That somehow, Nick's rage could be managed. That this slow-boiling disaster wouldn't explode. Until December 14th. The tragedy didn't begin that day. It culminated. The seeds were planted long ago. In the denial, in the excuses, in the carefully worded statements, in the NDAs and the smiles on red carpets. Because the Reiner family didn't just build a house of fame. They built it on cracks. Hairline fractures that deepened over decades. Cracks made of guilt, fear, and silence. And those cracks finally gave way when blood stained the floors of their Brentwood estate. But what if I told you the murders weren't the most shocking part? What if the most disturbing detail wasn't what Nick did, but what he wrote about it before it happened? We're just getting started. What came next would make the confessions look like the least shocking part of this story, and no one saw it coming. What if the murder didn't happen in a moment of madness, but in a place designed to contain it? That's the question investigators started asking the moment they stepped onto the Reiner estate. Because something didn't add up. The main house was pristine, quiet, controlled, a fortress of Hollywood order and opulence. But just across the stone path, surrounded by hedges, tucked behind a grove of old oaks, stood the guest house. A place no one really talked about. A place family members tiptoed around. A place Nick Reiner had lived for the last 4 years. Not in exile. Not exactly. But not as part of the family, either. It was a compromise. A containment zone. A ticking clock disguised as a backyard cottage. And that guest house. It was the final warning. But no one was listening. Let's walk into that guest house together. You open the front door. What do you see? Not a teenager's crash pad. Not a young man's sanctuary. But a carefully curated illusion of independence. Leather-bound journals on the coffee table. A tiny kitchen that never looked used. Curtains always drawn, windows always locked. Walls covered in scribbled notes, obscure movie quotes, and what one investigator described as rage maps. They weren't blueprints. Not exactly. They were more like diagrams of emotion. Anger on paper. One wall had tally marks. Hundreds of them. Just tallies. When police later analyzed them, they found they matched, almost exactly. Today's Nick hadn't left the property. Why was he counting? And more importantly, what was he waiting for? But this wasn't just some makeshift living space. It was the family's secret solution. Nick couldn't function in the outside world. He'd tried, several times. He'd failed out of at least 2 community colleges. He'd been fired from a dog grooming job after allegedly yelling at a customer's child. He'd had multiple psychiatric evaluations, but refused long-term treatment. And after one particular incident, details still sealed by court order, he'd returned to the Reiner property with one condition. He would live in the guest house. The staff weren't told much. Some were allegedly fired for asking questions. One former housekeeper told an anonymous source, "We weren't allowed to clean the guest house. If he needed something, we left it outside the door." Let that sink in. A multi-million-dollar estate. And inside it, barely 100 feet from where Rob and Michelle Reiner slept, was a man they didn't allow anyone to approach. Does that sound like safety? Or a slow-motion disaster? Still, they painted it as healing. Rob would speak vaguely about family complexities in rare moments of candor. Michelle once said during a fundraiser, "Every family has its struggles. We believe in keeping ours private, but loving through them." But the truth was far darker. Nick wasn't just reclusive. He wasn't just troubled. He was dangerous. And everyone knew it. The family reportedly had a private security consultant review the guest house setup. He advised reinforced locks on the main home. He recommended panic buttons. He offered an emergency removal plan. None of it was implemented. Why? Because Rob said it would make things worse. He wanted Nick to feel trusted. But trust, in this case, wasn't compassion. It was delusion. Romy's journal entries, now leaked to the media, reveal what it felt like to live just yards away from the guest house. "I can't sleep when he's pacing. I hear it through the hedges. Back and forth, all night. He mutters sometimes. About Mom. About me. Dad says he's getting better. I think he's getting more patient. If anything happens, please someone read this." I tried. I did. These weren't written the night before the murder. They were written months earlier. Which begs the question. Did anyone really believe Nick was getting better? Or did they just hope he wouldn't get worse? Because hoping someone doesn't explode isn't a plan. It's a gamble. And the Reiners bet wrong. The night of December 13th was quiet. Too quiet. Surveillance footage shows Rob and Michelle entering the main house at 7:42 p.m. They'd returned from dinner with close friends. Smiling. Laughing. It was, reportedly, Michelle's birthday weekend. No one noticed anything unusual until around 10:30 p.m., when Nick was seen exiting the guest house. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't muttering. He walked directly to the trash bins, dropped something inside, walked back in. Nothing suspicious until police later retrieved the trash bag. Inside, 2 burnt journals. The edges still warm. Pages too damaged to fully recover. But one phrase stood out. Scorched. Half legible. Just 5 words. I waited. I always knew. So what was the guest house, really? A residence? A cell? A time bomb? Maybe it was all 3. What's chilling is that the family had warning signs, blaring, obvious signs, and still chose proximity over protection. Because love doesn't mean keeping the monster close. Love, sometimes, means closing the door. And the Reiners? They left it wide open. There's one more detail you should know. A neighbor's security camera, unrelated to the Reiners, captured audio the night of the murders. A scream, then silence, then footsteps. Calm, deliberate. Moving from the main house, back to the guest house. When police arrived, Nick didn't answer the door at first. They knocked. Called out. He opened slowly, his voice low. According to the report, he said, "Is it done?" Not what's going on. Not are they okay? Not help. Just that. Is it done? Was that a question? Or a statement? Because the more you learn about that night, the harder it is to tell. After Nick's arrest, detectives swarmed the guest house. They found more than just bloodied clothing and scorched notebooks. They found a hidden USB drive, encrypted, buried inside a hollowed-out book. When decrypted, it contained a folder titled, "Last Words." Inside, dozens of audio files. Rants, plans, threats, recordings of Nick talking to himself. In one, he says, "They think they can keep me out here, like I'm some dog. A ghost. I'm not a ghost. I'm the heir." Another, "Mom keeps looking at me like I'm broken, like I'm something they regret. I'm going to fix that." In another, "This house is mine. It always was. It started with him. It ends with them." He wasn't just spiraling. He was plotting. In silence. In secrecy. From the guest house. So why didn't the family act? Why didn't they move? Why didn't they get out? Because sometimes, love becomes blindness. Because sometimes, protecting someone means you end up protecting the problem. And because sometimes, deep down, people know the truth. They just pray it never becomes real. Until it does. Until sirens pierce the morning calm. Until police cross a blood-soaked threshold. Until the guest house becomes a crime scene. But what came next wasn't just shocking. It was damning. Because Romy wasn't just a witness to the aftermath. She was the one who led police to the truth. And what she told them would blow this case wide open. What happens in the moment time breaks. Not metaphorically, literally. A split second when silence becomes screaming. When a birthday weekend turns into a crime scene. When a family's legacy shatters, not with a scandal, but with blood. That moment, for the Reiner family, came at 6:41 a.m. on Sunday, December 14th. That was the timestamp. But the truth? The nightmare had already started. And when time froze, Romy Reiner pressed on pause. Because what she told the police after calling 911 didn't just change the investigation. It changed everything we thought we knew about this family. Let's go minute by minute. Because every detail matters. 6:29 a.m. The Brentwood neighborhood is quiet. The sun is just beginning to rise. Motion sensors capture movement outside the Reiner guest house. A tall figure, barefoot, walking toward the main house. 6:33 a.m. A faint scream is heard. Not long, not high-pitched, just enough to trigger a dog barking 2 doors down. 6:34 a.m. The front door to the main house swings open. No sign of forced entry. 6:39 a.m. Romy Reiner returns from her early morning run. Her Fitbit later confirms it. A 4.7-mile loop, ending right at the iron gate. 6:40 a.m. She enters. Stops at the foyer. Something's wrong. 6:41 a.m. Romy dials 911. The call lasts 78 seconds. Her voice? Steady. Her words? Chilling. "There's been an incident. My parents they're not breathing. There's blood. I think it was my brother. Please send someone now." Read that again. She didn't guess. She didn't say maybe. She said, "I think it was my brother." With no hesitation. Why? Because this wasn't a shock to her. It was a confirmation. When officers arrived, Romy was standing outside. Pale, barefoot, shaking, but composed. She led them inside. The master bedroom was drenched in silence. Rob Reiner, filmmaker, father, icon, was slumped over the side of the bed, his head resting against the nightstand. Blood pooled beneath him, multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck. Michelle, his wife, his partner, was curled on the other side. Defensive wounds on her arms. A gash across her abdomen. There were no signs of a struggle in the room. No broken furniture. No signs of forced entry. Only clean, clinical violence. And then, as police began to secure the scene, Romy said something that stunned everyone in the room. "You need to check the guest house." One of the officers asked, "Why?" She looked at him and said, "Because he told me this would happen." "Wait, back up," he told her. "Yes." In her official statement, Romy explained something she had never shared publicly, never even told her siblings. 2 months earlier, during a rare conversation in the garden, Nick had cornered her. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't raged. He just leaned in and said, "It's almost time. When she asked, "Time for what?" he just smiled. "You'll see. It's Mom's birthday soon." She thought it was a twisted joke, a weird outburst. But something about the way he said it, it haunted her. She journaled about it that night. And again, the week before the murders, she saw him sketching something on the patio. She couldn't see what it was, but when he noticed her watching, he covered it, just like that. He never spoke to her again. When detectives entered the guest house, Nick was inside, sitting at the edge of his bed, still in his pajamas, blood on his shirt, drying at the cuffs. He didn't resist. He didn't panic. He reportedly looked up and said, "I knew you'd come," as if it were expected, as if this was all part of a plan. When asked what happened, he didn't answer. But a search of the guest house revealed more than just evidence of a crime. It revealed premeditation. Gloves, a hunting knife, burnt notebooks, the USB drive labeled "last words," and a piece of paper pinned to the wall with a knife. I waited. I watched. You didn't listen. For sentences. No signature. But no doubt who it belonged to. Back at the main house, investigators began piecing together the timeline. They discovered 2 wine glasses in the kitchen, both half full. Had Rob and Michelle been celebrating? Unwinding. Was it one final toast? The dishwasher was running. Their phones were charging by the bed. Everything felt normal, except for the fact that they were dead. And then, they found something odd. In Michelle's hand, clenched tightly, a torn scrap of paper. The handwriting matched Nick's. It read, "It was never going to be yours." Was he talking about the house? The family? The legacy? Detectives weren't sure. But the message was clear. This wasn't random. This was personal. When news of the murders broke, Hollywood froze. Tributes poured in. Celebrities, politicians, former co-stars. But there was one response that came faster than anyone expected. A second statement from the Reiner children, this time just from Romy. "I want to be honest. I knew something was going to happen. I tried to get help. I tried to raise the alarm. But I didn't scream loud enough. And now it's too late." She didn't hide. She didn't deflect. She took ownership. But also, she passed the torch. Because she followed that statement with 3 words that shattered everything. Check the diary. And what police found next would rip the lid off this case. Because Nick hadn't just written a diary. He'd written everything. And it was all about them. That's when the investigation turned from tragedy to horror. Because what they uncovered wasn't just a motive. It was a manifesto. A twisted log of rage, resentment, obsession, and calculation. A book of secrets, of planning, of prophecy. But we'll get there. Because before we dive into Nick's diary, we need to understand why Romy's warning carried so much weight. She wasn't just reacting. She'd been watching. She'd been recording. And she had proof that the family ignored the signs. But even she didn't know what was hidden between the pages. Because what Nick wrote down wasn't just unhinged. It was a blueprint. And what came next, what they found in those pages, would leave even the investigators speechless. No one was ready for what Nick had documented. No one. What if the most damning evidence didn't come from a knife, or a diary, or a surveillance camera? What if it came from a sister's mouth? Because when Romy Reiner finally sat down with investigators, after the house was taped off, after the guest house was sealed, after Nick was taken away in handcuffs, she didn't cry first. She talked. And what she said made seasoned detectives exchange looks. Not because it was confusing, but because it confirmed their worst fear. This wasn't a family blindsided by tragedy. This was a family that saw it coming. Romy's interview began at 9:18 a.m., just hours after the bodies were discovered. She declined a lawyer. She declined a support person. She asked for water, folded her hands in her lap, and said one sentence before anyone even asked a question. "We all knew something was wrong. For years." That's how it started. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I can't believe this happened." But a confession. And once it started, it didn't stop. Romy described growing up in a house where tension wasn't loud. It was constant. A hum in the walls. A feeling you couldn't name, but couldn't escape. She said Nick's moods controlled the rhythm of the household. When he was calm, everything worked. When he wasn't, everyone adjusted. Meals got canceled. Plans changed. Voices dropped. She said they learned early how to read the room. And Nick was the room. She described moments that never made it to police reports. Nick screaming in the driveway at 2 a.m., accusing their father of rewriting history. Nick punching a hole through a bathroom door after Michelle asked him to take his medication. Nick staring at family photos and asking, flatly, "Do you ever wish I wasn't in them?" These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns, and patterns were ignored. Then Romy said something that reframed the entire investigation. She said the family didn't just suspect Nick could be dangerous. They discussed it. Explicitly. Multiple times. There were meetings. Closed-door conversations. Late-night arguments. Tracy wanted intervention. Jake wanted distance. Romy wanted safety. Rob wanted patience. Michelle wanted peace. And Nick? Nick wanted control. According to Romy, the guest house wasn't a kindness. It was a concession. A way to keep Nick close enough to monitor, but far enough to pretend everything was fine. They called it independence. Nick called it exile. Romy told investigators that Nick repeatedly referred to the guest house as the punishment house. He told her, more than once, "They put me out there so they don't have to look at what they made." Did he mean his mental health? Or something darker? Even Romy wasn't sure. Then came the turning point. The moment Romy said she stopped feeling uneasy and started feeling afraid. It was the night Nick asked her a question that made her skin crawl. They were alone in the garden. No yelling. No pacing. Just calm. Too calm. He looked at her and asked, "If Mom and Dad were gone, would you forgive me?" Romy laughed nervously at first. Thought it was morbid humor. But he didn't laugh. He just waited. She asked what he meant. And he said, "I mean, would you understand why it had to happen?" That was the moment. The moment she stopped pretending. The moment she started documenting everything. Romy admitted to detectives that she began recording conversations, saving text messages, writing down dates. She said she didn't know why, only that something in her gut told her she would need proof one day. She said she begged her father to take Nick's threats seriously. She said Michelle cried and told her, "If we give up on him, he has nothing." Romy's response, "What about us?" That question never got answered. Investigators asked her the hardest question. "Why didn't you call the police?" Romy didn't hesitate. "Because my father begged me not to. He said it would destroy our family. He said Nick would never recover from that." She paused, then added quietly, "I think he was wrong." Then she said something that made the room go silent. "I think my dad chose the wrong child to protect." That wasn't anger. That was grief mixed with clarity. And it was devastating. Romy also confirmed something the public didn't know yet. There had been a previous violent incident. One that never made the news. One that was handled internally. Nick had attacked someone close to the family. The victim survived. A settlement was reached. An NDA was signed. Nick was sent away briefly, then brought back. This wasn't speculation. This was history. And it changed everything. Because now the murders weren't just tragic. They were preventable. When detectives asked Romy if she believed Nick planned the killings in advance, her answer was immediate. Yes. She told them about the sketches, the journals, the way Nick talked about time as if it were a countdown. She told them he'd stopped raging months earlier. Stopped screaming. Stopped pacing. He became quiet. Focused. That scared her more than anything. Because rage is loud. Planning is silent. Before the interview ended, Romy made one final request. She asked investigators to read Nick's diary in full. Not just the violent parts. Not just the final entries. All of it, she said. Because that's where the truth is. About him. About us. Then she stood up, looked one detective in the eye, and said something that would later appear in leaked notes. "If you want to know why this happened, you won't find it in the blood. You'll find it in what we ignored." That was Romy's confession. Not just about Nick. About the family. About the years of silence. About the truth they hid. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Nick's diary contained something far more disturbing than rage. It contained intent, dates, details, and one entry that suggested the murders weren't the end of his plan. They were the beginning. And once investigators reached that page, everything changed. What if the person you feared most left behind a written map of everything they were about to do? Not poetry, not venting, but a prelude to murder. Because Nick Reiner's diary wasn't just angry scribbles. It wasn't the scattered scrawl of someone losing control. It was cold, methodical, unmistakably lucid. And it painted a terrifying picture, not just of Nick's mind, but of a family that had seen this storm forming long before the blood spilled. The investigators who read it said they felt like they were watching the crime unfold in slow motion. And the most disturbing part? Nick didn't seem confused about what he was doing. He was proud of it. The diary was discovered during the second sweep of the guest house, tucked behind a loose wooden panel in the closet. Not in plain sight. Not even with the others he'd scorched in the fire bin. This one, it was hidden, preserved, meant to be found. The leather was cracked, but the binding was firm. It looked worn but cared for, like something important, like a trophy. The first page was dated exactly 4 years prior to the murders. December 14th, Michelle's birthday. And the first line, "They will never understand. But one day, they'll know why I chose today." Investigators flipped through pages filled with sketches, some beautiful, some grotesque. There were countdowns, numbered days, circled dates, underlined names. Most pages started with a sentence, a theme, like chapters in a novel. Today, they ignored me again. Today, I tested the locks. Today, she looked at me like I was a monster. She blinked twice, like a warning. I think she knows. Then, halfway through, something shifted. The handwriting became neater. The sentences grew longer. The entries? Colder. The guest house is in exile. Its position? Tactical. I can see the entire property from my window. I know the gardener's schedule. I know the squeaky stair on the back patio. I know who checks the doors. I know when Dad sleeps. This wasn't diary material. This was reconnaissance. One page had a hand-drawn floor plan of the main house. Every door, every exit, every window, even the keypad code to the alarm system. How did he get that? According to Romy's statement, he watched. She recalled once seeing him write something while their father was entering the passcode. She thought he was doodling. He wasn't. He was recording. And if you think this is starting to sound like a horror movie, you're not wrong. But this wasn't fiction. This was premeditation. Then came the most haunting section of the diary, titled simply, "The Cleansing." It spanned 23 pages. And it detailed, step by step, how Nick planned to remove the infection. The infection? His own family. He wrote, "They corrupted the Reiner name, turned it into performance. They don't see the rot behind the smile. I see it. I smell it. I am it." He described a vision of restoring purity to the family legacy. He wrote about wanting to erase the weakness his parents represented. And then, in a passage that made even hardened investigators nauseous, "They will die together. That's mercy. 1 blow for her. 2 for him. He'll fight harder." He even predicted Romy's reaction. She will cry, but she will understand. She always understood. She'll find them. It's better that way. He even knew who would find the bodies. This wasn't insanity. This was a man with a plan. And every part of it unfolded exactly as he wrote it. But then came a twist no one expected. A name appeared. Jake. Multiple times. Not with rage. Not with resentment. But with envy. He became what I was supposed to be. Dad talks about him like he's the heir. Heir to what? Lies. I know the truth. I watched the therapy tapes. I know what Dad said about me. That line struck a chord. Investigators circled back. What therapy tapes? Romy hadn't mentioned any. Tracy didn't know about them either. But Nick wrote several entries hinting at family therapy sessions from years earlier. Sessions that were allegedly recorded. One entry claimed, "They sat in a room with a stranger and talked about me like I was dead. Like I wasn't the only one telling the truth. Like I didn't see what they did to each other." It was clear now. Nick didn't just hate his parents. He felt betrayed by the entire family. And most of all, he felt watched, controlled, exiled. Then came the final entry. It was dated the day before the murders, December 13th. The page was titled, "Closure." He wrote, "This is not madness. It is math, precision, balance, a reckoning. I will walk into the house tomorrow. I will return the shame. I will finish the page they started." And then, nothing. No signature. No goodbye. Just a final line. I waited. I watched. I warned. That line matched the scrap of paper clutched in Michelle's hand. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. A message. A claim. A warning to everyone else. When the detectives brought the diary to Romy, her hands trembled. She confirmed the handwriting. But she also said something that chilled everyone in the room. She said, "There's another one." Another diary? They asked where. Romy wasn't sure. She just remembered something Nick said the week before the murders. "This one's for them. The other one's for me." Had he hidden a second book? And if so, what was inside? Was it more plans? More threats? More names? Or something worse? No one knew. But now, A man who had murdered his parents in cold blood was in custody and silent. And if they wanted the truth about what came next, they'd have to find that second diary. Because the first one, it wasn't just a journal. It was the blueprint of a killer. And it was missing one crucial page. A page that detectives would later recover. And what was written on it would take the case in a whole new direction. Why would someone walk away from their famous family right before it imploded? Tracy Reiner knew something. Not in hindsight. Not through rumors. She knew in real time. She saw the storm coming, years before blood stained the tiles of her parents' Brentwood estate. And unlike the others, Jake, Romy, even Rob and Michelle, Tracy didn't try to fix it. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She left. And now, after years of silence, her story has finally emerged. Because sometimes, the quiet one in the family is the one who saw it all. Tracy Reiner, for most of her life, lived under two legacies. She was born into Hollywood royalty, daughter of actress Penny Marshall, and adopted by Rob Reiner after he married her mother. That made her a child of both the Marshall and Reiner dynasties. A legacy of laughter, cameras, power. She appeared in Big, When Harry Met Sally, A League of Their Own, small but memorable roles. She wasn't just part of Hollywood. She was Hollywood. But around 2012, something changed. Tracy began pulling away. Less public appearances. No more red carpets. No interviews. She went quiet. People chalked it up to burnout, grief after her mother's passing, or a desire for privacy. But now we know, it was something else entirely. Sources close to Tracy claim she'd always been the most intuitive of the Reiner children. The observer. The one who watched Nick from a distance, long before others realized anything was wrong. She saw the emotional instability, the aggression, the manipulation. One friend recalls a chilling conversation they had in 2015. Tracy allegedly said, "If he doesn't get help, someone's going to get hurt. Maybe all of us." That same year, she reportedly refused to attend Thanksgiving at the Reiner estate. She told a colleague, "I'm not going to sit across from a time bomb and pretend it's cranberry sauce." That wasn't an exaggeration. That was a warning. But the family didn't listen. Tracy wasn't just worried. She took action. Multiple sources have now confirmed that she reached out to a private psychiatric consultant in 2016. Not for herself. For Nick. She provided documents, described behavior, shared concerns. But when the consultant reached out to the family, he was shut down. Rob allegedly thanked him but declined further help, saying, "We have it under control. He's just struggling." Tracy's response. She cut ties. Not out of spite. Out of fear. And in a now-leaked email to a close family friend, she wrote, "I love my family, but I'm not going to wait around for the obituary." That email was dated 2 years before the murders. In the aftermath of Rob and Michelle's death, Tracy stayed silent, while Jake and Romy made public statements. While Romy gave interviews and cooperated with investigators, Tracy vanished, until 1 week later, when her lawyer delivered a handwritten letter to LAPD and to the press. It read, "To the public, we were a beautiful family. To each other, we were a mosaic of grief, brilliance, and avoidance. I knew Nick was sick. I knew he was dangerous. I begged our father to listen. I walked away because I refused to be part of the cover-up." She went on, "I am not surprised by what happened. I am devastated that it had to happen for anyone else to see what I've seen for years." And then, in the most damning line, Nick didn't just kill our parents. He exposed what silence kills. That one letter cracked open a new layer of the case. Because now, the world wasn't just hearing from the younger sister who watched the house burn. They were hearing from the sister who left before it did. Investigators followed up with Tracy, and what she provided next would shock even the most skeptical detectives. Voicemails, emails, notes, proof that she had warned her family multiple times. One voicemail to Rob from 2017. "You're gambling with your life, Dad. You think love is enough. It's not. Not this time." Another from 2019. "I'm done pretending. You've asked us to protect Nick for years. But who's protecting everyone else from him?" She even attempted to file a conservatorship in 2020. The paperwork was started, but never completed. Why? Because Rob asked her not to. He told her Nick was getting better, that filing would destroy him. And Tracy backed down. Out of respect. Out of love. But mostly, out of exhaustion. Now, Tracy is cooperating with prosecutors. Quietly, reluctantly. She's not seeking attention. She's not doing interviews. But she's sharing everything. She told detectives about a disturbing night at the estate in 2014, when Nick allegedly cornered Michelle in the kitchen and whispered, "I know what you're hiding." When Michelle asked what he meant, he said, "You know, I'm not like the others. You see it. That's why you're scared of me." Tracy was in the house. She saw her mother's face afterward. White. Frozen. She told Rob. Nothing happened. And that, Tracy says, was the moment she knew he would never be stopped. One investigator described Tracy's demeanor as stoic, but broken. She didn't cry during her testimony. She didn't rage. She just laid it out. Fact by fact. Warning by warning. A decade of signals. All ignored. And when asked if she blamed anyone else in the family, she said something that echoed in the courtroom. "I don't blame Jake. I don't blame Romy. I blame the system we were born into, where silence was rewarded, where pretending was survival." Then she stood up and left the room, just like she left the family years ago, because sometimes walking away isn't abandonment. It's the only sane choice. But here's the twist. Tracy's testimony also opened a new door, because in one of her final voicemails to Rob, just months before the murders, she referenced something that hadn't yet been discovered. "If you won't listen to me, at least watch the tapes. You'll see what I see. You'll see what he's becoming." The tapes. The therapy tapes. The ones Nick referenced in his diary. Now, detectives had two independent confirmations that these tapes existed. But no one had seen them. No one knew where they were. And if they were real, they could contain everything. The threats. The denial. The quiet enabling. The breaking point. The truth. But where were they? Who had them? And why were they hidden? What came next would pull the Reiner family deeper into the dark. Because once those tapes surfaced, no one's reputation would survive. What happens when the one holding everything together finally lets go? Because if Tracy was the sister who walked away and Romy was the sister who sounded the alarm, then Jake Reiner was the one who tried, desperately, to keep the house from collapsing while standing right in the middle of it. And it nearly destroyed him. Jake wasn't loud about his fear. He was precise, measured, careful. The kind of careful that looks like control until it isn't. For years, Jake Reiner was the public-facing shield of the family. Journalist, commentator, the son who spoke in complete sentences, with calm eyes and a reassuring tone. If anyone could explain away chaos, it was Jake. And he did. Again and again. Friends say Jake became the family's unofficial translator, softening Nick's behavior for outsiders, reframing incidents, choosing words that wouldn't raise eyebrows. Nick's going through something. Nick needs time. Nick's not well, but he's not dangerous. Those were Jake's phrases. And at first, he believed them. But belief has a shelf life. And Jake's expired long before December 14th. Behind the scenes, Jake was unraveling. He kept lists, notes, schedules. He tracked Nick's moods the way some people track weather. Good days, bad days, volatile days. One former partner said Jake would cancel plans at the last minute, saying things like, "I can't leave them alone tonight. Something's off. I just got a text that doesn't feel right." Jake didn't sleep well for years. He stopped drinking coffee because it made his anxiety worse. He stopped visiting the house unless he knew Nick wasn't around. And when Nick moved into the guest house, Jake argued against it harder than anyone. According to family emails later obtained by investigators, Jake wrote to Rob, "This isn't independence. It's proximity. If something happens, we won't be able to say we didn't know." Rob's response was short. "He's my son. I won't abandon him." Jake never replied, but he saved the email. That's something Jake did a lot. He saved things. Texts, emails, voicemails. Not to use against anyone, at least not at first. But because part of him knew someday he might need proof. Proof that he tried. Proof that this wasn't sudden. Proof that this wasn't madness. It was a slow, predictable burn. Jake's breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with silence. In 2022, he stopped visiting the Brentwood house entirely. He stopped answering Nick's messages. He stopped pretending. In a message to Romy, he wrote, "I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm standing between him and a match." Romy begged him not to disappear. She said she was scared. Jake responded with one sentence that would later resurface in the investigation. "I'm scared too. That's why I'm stepping back." That decision haunted him, because when December 14th arrived, Jake wasn't there. He was 3 states away, and part of him will never forgive himself for that. When news broke of the murders, Jake reportedly collapsed. Not figuratively, physically. A hotel employee later said he found Jake sitting on the floor of his room, phone in hand, staring at the wall. Jake didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just said, over and over, "I knew it. I knew it." Those weren't the words of shock. They were the words of confirmation. Jake returned to Los Angeles 2 days later. He didn't go to the house. He didn't go to the police station. He went somewhere else. A storage unit. Inside were boxes labeled by year. Emails printed out. Notes. Screenshots. A decade of evidence. Jake had been quietly archiving the family's slow descent. When investigators finally sat down with him, they realized something chilling. Jake hadn't just been a witness. He'd been preparing for the aftermath. Jake's interview was different from Romy's. Where she spoke emotionally, Jake spoke clinically. Dates, times, context. He laid out a timeline of Nick's deterioration, paired with the family's denial. He described meetings where the word dangerous was used and dismissed. He described arguments where he begged for intervention and was overruled. And then he said something that changed the direction of the case. He admitted he had known about the therapy tapes, but he didn't know where they were. This is where the room went still. Because until now, the therapy tapes were a rumor, a whisper, something referenced in Nick's diary, something Tracy alluded to. But Jake confirmed they were real. He said Rob insisted on recording several family therapy sessions for continuity, to track progress, to prove Nick was improving. Jake thought it was a terrible idea. He worried Nick would fixate on them, that they would become fuel. Rob dismissed his concerns. They're locked away. Nick will never see them. Jake didn't believe that, and he was right. Jake told investigators that Nick once quoted a therapist word for word, a phrase Jake distinctly remembered from one of the sessions. That was when he knew. Nick had heard the tapes, somehow, but Jake didn't know how. And more importantly, he didn't know what Nick heard. Because those sessions weren't gentle. They weren't affirming. They were raw. Parents admitting fear. Siblings admitting resentment. A therapist asking the unthinkable question, what if Nick isn't safe to be around? Jake remembers Rob going silent after that question, Michelle crying, Nick staring at the floor, and the tape continuing to record everything. If Nick heard that, if he heard his family say those words, Jake believes it may have been the point of no return. Then Jake revealed his own secret, the one he hadn't told Romy, the one he hadn't told Tracy, the one he hadn't even told his parents. He admitted that weeks before the murders, Nick sent him a message, not threatening, not angry, just 4 words. You chose them. Jake didn't respond. He didn't know how. He thought ignoring it was safer. He thought silence might de-escalate. He was wrong. Investigators asked Jake the question everyone was thinking. Do you think Nick did this to punish you? Jake didn't answer right away. He looked down. Then he said, I think he did it so we'd finally listen. That answer haunted everyone in the room, because it suggested something far more disturbing than rage. It suggested intention, message, legacy. Jake left the interview shaken, not because he was hiding something, but because he realized something too late. Nick didn't just want revenge. He wanted an audience. And the diary, the tapes, the timing, they weren't just evidence. They were props. And if that was true, then the murders weren't the final act. They were the opening scene. Because someone else had access to those tapes. Someone else had moved them. Someone else might have heard everything Nick heard. And when investigators followed that thread, it led them somewhere no one expected. To a locked cabinet, to a missing key, and to a discovery that would turn the family's private therapy sessions into public evidence. Because the tapes weren't gone, they were hidden. And once they were found, no one would be able to deny what they revealed. What if the worst things you ever said about your family were recorded? Not just spoken in anger, not shouted in the heat of a fight, but said carefully, quietly, with a therapist present, with everyone listening. And then, those recordings leaked. To the public, to the press, to the very person who was never supposed to hear them. Because that's what happened to the Reiner family. And what those tapes revealed destroyed the last shred of their reputation. It confirmed every fear, every rumor, every hidden truth. Because inside that therapy room, the masks came off. And Nick Reiner heard everything. The tapes were real. 12 sessions. Each one recorded with permission. Rob Reiner wanted documentation. He believed in tracking growth. Michelle reportedly resisted at first. So did Jake. But Rob insisted. This is how we'll know it's working, he'd said. He never imagined those files would become Exhibit A in a double murder case. Or that the recordings, once hidden in a locked filing cabinet, would be missing until they turned up on a USB drive, mailed anonymously to a journalist. And once it hit the press, there was no going back. The first tape begins innocently enough. The family is seated in a semicircle. Nick is quiet, eyes down, shoulders hunched. Romy sits stiffly. Jake taps his pen. Michelle tries to smile. Rob speaks first. We're here because we love each other, and we want to find a way to live together. The therapist nods, then asks the question that sets everything in motion. Do you feel safe around Nick? Silence. For 6 full seconds. Then Romy answers. No. It's soft. Almost whispered. But it's there. No. I don't feel safe. Jake doesn't say anything. Tracy, present via phone, exhales sharply. Rob leans forward. He's our son. He's our brother. He's not a threat. He's hurting. The therapist presses. Romy, why don't you feel safe? She doesn't flinch. Because he talks about killing us. Gasps. A shuffle of chairs. Nick says nothing. He doesn't say it directly, but he implies it. All the time. Like, he's playing with the idea. Michelle murmurs something unintelligible. The therapist turns to Jake. Do you agree? Jake pauses. I think Nick is struggling. I think he needs help. It's a dodge. And everyone knows it. Another session. Different day. This one's worse. Nick is more vocal. He tells the therapist. I think they're the problem. Not me. They look at me like I'm diseased. They keep me in the guest house like I'm radioactive. I'm not violent. I'm awake. Rob interrupts. That's not true. That's not fair. Nick turns sharply. You're a liar. The word hangs in the air. Then Nick says something that foreshadows the tragedy. If something happens to you, it won't be because I'm crazy. It'll be because you made me this way. The room falls into chaos. Michelle cries. Tracy hangs up. Jake stands up and walks out. And the tape keeps rolling. 1 session later, the therapist gets blunt. Has anyone in this family feared for their life? Tracy's voice, over speakerphone, is firm. Yes. Romy agrees. Yes. Michelle hesitates, then whispers. Sometimes. And Rob? He says nothing. For 10 seconds. Then, I don't want to say it. The therapist asks why. Rob's voice trembles. Because if I say it, then I have to do something about it. And I don't know what to do. That's the line that shattered the public. Because that was the moment the world realized. They knew. They all knew. And they did nothing. The press went wild. Headlines screamed. Reiner family therapy tapes leaked. Murdered parents admitted fear of son. Inside the Hollywood house of denial. Podcasts dissected every quote. News anchors replayed clips on loop. In social media, it exploded. Clips went viral. People debated every word. Some blamed the family for not acting. Others blamed the system that made them hide it. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a family caught off guard. This was a family caught in paralysis. And Nick? He wasn't shocked by the tapes. Because he already knew. He'd heard them. Long before they leaked. And investigators finally figured out how. The therapist who recorded the sessions? She'd stored them digitally. Encrypted, but accessible. And someone had accessed the account from an unrecognized device 3 months before the murders. That IP address. Traced back to the Reiner guest house. Nick hacked the files. He watched the sessions. He listened to his family dissect him. Question him. Fear him. He heard the words, dangerous. He heard the phrase, time bomb. He heard his mother say, softly, sometimes I wish I could go back and stop it. Whatever I did wrong. Whatever made him like this. And he heard Jake ask, what if we're past the point of helping him? Those weren't just words. They were confirmation. In Nick's mind, they were betrayal. The tapes didn't just expose family secrets. They revealed something deeper. A pattern. A cycle. Love, denial, fear, guilt, silence. Again and again. Each member trapped. Wanting to help. Wanting to run. Wanting it to stop. But no one knew how. So they smiled. They donated to charities. They took photos at premieres. And they locked Nick in a guest house. With access to the truth. Until he exploded. And the house of mirrors shattered. After the leak, Jake refused interviews. Tracy disappeared. Romy released a single line on Instagram. You all heard what we heard. Now you know what silence sounds like. And then she deleted her account. Because there was nothing left to say. The world had heard it all. But there was one thing still missing. One recording. One tape. Session number 12. It was listed in the therapist's index. But no one had heard it. Not police. Not prosecutors. Not the family. It was marked private, unsent. Was it deleted?